coming to the agenda, as you see, what I'm going to cover in this 15 to 20 minutes of today's call is, first we will try to understand what is the difference between React Native and React JS. So first, once you understand the difference of between when this particular native is used, when JS is used, then we'll go to see what exactly the in-depth of it, like what are the features of React Native and what are the advantages and disadvantages of both React Native, along with, then we'll see the features of React JS along with its, I would say, the both pros and cons of React Native, and finally we can conclude with your questionnaires if you have any questions to get answered. So moving ahead, so this particular part is the main differences. Both are of the same, React Native and React JS both are of the same part, but the difference of it is, if you see the first part, like as you could see, owing to its latest thing, both are related with JavaScript, but the way of implementation, as I said, is both are JavaScript oriented, but the way of implementation is a bit different. Like if you call the API calls or the way that you are trying to call a method is getting different. So that is one particular difference. Apart from that, if you see the progressive technology in today's mobile as well as in web technology, so the main difference as you were learning to curve was React.js is mostly used in your web application. So whenever you go with any web application, like the one that you showed me, right, the page will go with Java, that will go with your React.js. So whatever you code for a web technology or for your web application, that goes with your React.js. Whatever you go with your mobile technology, like Android or iOS methodology, that goes with your React Native. So that is the one major difference. If you see where it gets preluded of both the things is, your React.js is mostly used in your web technological part, wherever you go with your laptops with, say, Macintosh or Opera or Windows or in Linux. So all that web application part goes with React.js methodology to implement the pages. And in terms of your mobile applications like iOS or Android systems, they develop your particular code with using React Native. So now comes to the developer's efficiency. That is one other part. Both are of the same, but as I said, based on the developer, like let's say you have been as a web developer. I mean to say you are most confident on Windows. So onto the web technology, you go with React.js. And let's say if I am an Android developer and my application wants to go with Android, I go with React Native. So majorly the way of differentiation between another point is it gets differed in terms of the developer's efficiency to use whatever the script that you want to go ahead. And last but not the least, it's the JavaScript library where you develop your high-performing both in terms of your UI. So this comes to, I think, finally, as I said, React Native is mostly used. If you see, React Native is just a JavaScript library where you go with your web applications, and React Native is something like in terms of your mobile application developments. Let's say if this page is going to be displayed only on mobile apps, you go with developing with React Native. So now comes up with your features. Now, if you see React Native, some of the features of React Native. So now you are clearly understood what React Native is and what React JS is, right? So keeping that into picture, we are having a deep dive into React Native first, then followed by React JS. So coming to React Native, as I said, this is a mobile application where you go ahead on it. The first and foremost point is it's faster to build in React Native because since it's only mobile application oriented, it's easier to build. It supports cross-platform mechanisms. Cross-platform in the means is only in mobile applications. Like, for example, if you jump from your Samsung Android mobile to say some iPhone using iOS mechanism. So similarly, that is the cross-platform. So if you see, you can jump from your Android to your iOS or from your iOS back to your Android, whatever the cross-platform mechanism. So that is easily being supported by means of your React Native. Then the third point is something like, hope you know this, React Native is something like hot reloading. This is one technical jargon, I would say, in terms of technical jargon in React as well as in Angular. If you see, people, experts use that word hot reloading. So that's why I've given you a small abbreviation of what that hot reloading means. Hard reloading means it allows to see your changes recursively once you have made changed the code, rather than waiting for, because as you know, you are given me a requirement and you want to see how picturesquely it could be able to view on your mobile, right? So it gives
Right.
your entire, so as a developer I can change it internally. Let's say the same page whatever you have just now shown me, so let's say I want to
Mm-hmm.
have some a look and feel of that particular page, so a change in it. So probably you can change the bits and pieces of your source code, and immediately you can view the changes instantly without using any web apps, or I would say instantly I could see. So hot preloading is something like where you can see your changes in a very rapid way with the entire
Okay.
application, with your entire application, like whatever the changes that you made in your page, right? Let's say I want to see the right hand corner with some logo. Immediately you can make the change in your source code, and that entire page could be able to see visibly, rather than debugging and then what you say building up the code, which is not that case. Then it's used
Okay.
in smaller teams. Smaller teams is like, I would say, the meaning of smaller teams here is, as you know, the Android mobile users, it's something like uh, say within a group, or I would say something like a Twitter group or a WhatsApp group or a TikTok group. So of that scenarios, we can similarly use in smaller teams. It's faster in your application. Application wise, as I said, is faster to see, and the UI part is very simplified. So these are some of the features of React Native. Now coming to the next part, looking on to the advantages, the pros and cons of what React Native is. So first, let's look on the pros part, like what are the pros of React Native. These are quite a bit of pros of React Native. So you write your code once and use it anywhere, which means you start your source code developing, and once you deploy it onto your Android machine, or you can also move it to any iOS machine, or henceforth you can migrate it easily. So the source code could be migrated easily to run your application anywhere. Anywhere here it means is only on Android, or sorry, only on mobile applications. Then
Okay.
it's another part is it's UI focused, because as you see, the UI part is a much more concerned part in React JS. So it's mostly focused on UI, not mostly related with your backend relations. Then the third
Okay.
is something like cost effective. So comparing with your web application of using in React JS, using the React Native is something like cost effective, because you won't take that much cost budgeting for developing a project in using React Native, because it's only mobile based, not a web based. So the
Mm-hmm.
effect of cost is somewhat minimized when compared to that of React JS. And then it uses your native models. Native models means your native JavaScript modules, whatever the basic JavaScript, right? So it uses your native models, not any bigger for of it. Now coming to the cons of it, if you see always advantages, there would be always be a drawbacks. Some of the
Yeah.
drawbacks of this particular React Native are these things, the 5 points. First is it's a very less smooth in navigation, because what I mean to say is smooth navigation is maybe an Android device to load a page and navigate it is maybe a much more faster in terms of an iOS device. The reason is because your iOS microprocessors or the IC chips are much more convenient, whereas in an Android, let's say when you compare with say an iOS 11 version with a Samsung mobile with an A7,
Mm-hmm.
so the microprocessor or the inbuilt feature of a mobile applications might get different. So the page loading might take say, let's say, zero point 0.5 milliseconds in an Android, maybe it could be zero point 0.3 milliseconds in terms of loading in an iOS. So that I mean to say is less smooth navigation. Then the second point, as you could say, is it lacks in terms of custom modules. Custom modules is like, I mean to say, like it requires, because of if a page is getting loaded on a React Native, you can't go ahead with say Android 7 version and below. You require some minimum configurations, right, in order to get a web page. Probably,
Mm-hmm.
let's say, if maybe some parts, the page that you develop, you might have fixed some minimum configurations. Only with this configuration, you need to get a page loaded, because that is a minimum requirement, at least for a page to get loaded. So here, custom module is something like, I mean to say, is in terms of microprocessor, in terms of your Android or iOS versions, or apart
Mm-hmm.
from that, I would say some other extra hardware configurations, some updates, some CSS files, or like HTML7 and above you need to. So all these are custom modules which that lacks here. So Third point is it has to have a native developer. Only a person who knows well about React Native or React programmer could be able to develop. Because as you said just now, you were saying right just before this call, since you
Yeah.
develop the source code, you know where exactly you call that method. So a third person or as a guest user, I may not be able to know the much of your code. Only the developer
Mm.
can go and fix that particular code. So that is one drawback in React Native. And then last but before is something like, as a React Native developer, you need to follow some strict rules. So I mean to say some patterns, or you need to follow some strict rules in terms of your coding activities to make that particular what is say the source code to get in a UI part of it in a functional way. So you need to basically follow with some strict rules on it. But last but not is it lacks in terms of your robustness. Robustness is something like, what I mean to say is, as I said, the first point, loading in terms of iOS might get deferred in terms of an Android devices. So these are the pros and cons of React Native, I would say. Some of the models, the old classic legacy models of your JavaScript or your HTML, are getting called in
Mhm.
your React Native. But at JS, there are a lot of updations in your methods, or I would say a lot of features have been involved in the forthcoming versions of your React JS. So people start
Mm.
using React JS and then they try to migrate it to a picture
Mm.
of clear understanding of when you go with React JS and when you go with React
Mhm.
Native. And my request, what I would say is, if you are interested to learn React JS, start initially learning about React JS first. This is this particular topic, React JS, of trying
Mm.
to understand. Learning React JS will be much more easier, and then you can start going with React Native, because initially
Okay.
starting with React Native, it's something like you're tightly coupled, or I would say
Yeah.
that it's a bit of hard for you to understand. So what I would request, or I would suggest you is, go with learning React JS first, and then React Native